Welcome to Big Breaking News of America. Genesis Episode 23. Contemporary Relevance and Applications of the Patriarchal Narratives, Genesis 12:36. The Patriarchal Narratives, Genesis 12:36, form a theological and narrative cornerstone of the book of Genesis, chronicling the lives of Abraham, Abram, Isaac, and Jacob, whose covenantal relationship with God lays the groundwork for Israel's identity as a chosen people. These chapters shift from the universal concerns of the primeval history, Genesis 1:11, creation, sin, and humanity's dispersion, to the particular story of a family through which God promises land, Canaan, descendants, a great nation, and blessing for all nations, Genesis 12:1-3. Organized by the Toledo Generations formula, the narratives weave episodic stories of faith, conflict, divine intervention, and human frailty into a cohesive arc that prepares for Israel's emergence in the Torah's later books, Exodus, Deuteronomy. Rooted in the Middle Bronze Age, c. 2000–1500 BCE, setting and finalized during the Babylonian exile, 587–539 BCE, the narratives address timeless themes: covenant, faith, providence, human growth, land, and reconciliation, that resonate in the 21st century. Their contemporary relevance lies in their ability to speak to modern challenges: spiritual disconnection, interfaith tensions, social inequities, environmental crises, and cultural fragmentation. The narrative's applications span religious renewal, Jewish, Christian, Islamic, ethical frameworks, social justice, leadership, social movements, migration, gender equity, interfaith and intercultural dialogue, Abrahamic cooperation, and cultural innovation, art, literature, digital media. This exploration examines these areas, highlighting specific applications, theological insights, and their impact on global issues, demonstrating how Genesis 12:36 offers wisdom for navigating a complex, pluralistic world. 1. Religious renewal and spiritual applications. The patriarchal narratives inspire religious renewal across Jewish, Christian, and Islamic communities, offering spiritual insights that address modern seekers' quests for meaning, community, and connection with the divine. Judaism. Spiritual resilience. The narrative's emphasis on faith, emunah, seen in Abraham's trust, Genesis 15:6, and Jacob's wrestling, Genesis 32:22-32, resonates with Jews navigating secularism and cultural assimilation. Movements like Jewish renewal draw on the patriarchs' journeys to foster meditative practices, with Jacob's ladder, Genesis 28:10-22, symbolizing spiritual ascent. Organizations like the Aleph Alliance promote retreats that explore Genesis 12:36's themes of teshuvah, repentance, and divine encounter. Liturgical vitality. The Akedah, Genesis 22, remains central to Rosh Hashanah, with its call to reflect on sacrifice and divine provision inspiring sermons on personal renewal. The Covenant, Genesis 17, informs Brit Milah, linking modern Jewish families to ancestral faith, as seen in virtual Brit Milah ceremonies during the COVID-19 pandemic. Digital engagement. Online platforms like Spheria and My Jewish Learning offer midrashic insights into Genesis 12:36, enabling global Jewish communities to study texts like Bereshit Rabbah. Virtual Torah study groups, especially post-2020, use Abraham's hospitality, Genesis 18:18, to foster digital community, countering isolation. Christianity. Faith and transformation, Abraham's faith, Genesis 15:6, and the Akedah, Genesis 22, inspire Christian spiritual formation, with evangelical and Catholic retreats citing these narratives to encourage trust in God amidst uncertainty. The universal blessing, Genesis 12:3, aligns with mission theology, as seen in organizations like World Vision, which frame global outreach as fulfilling Abraham's legacy. Liturgical renewal. The narratives feature in Advent and Lent readings, with Jacob's wrestling, Genesis 32:22-32, symbolizing spiritual struggle. Progressive churches use Hagar's story, Genesis 21:17-21, to address marginalized voices, integrating Genesis 12:36 into social justice liturgies. Digital worship. Post-pandemic, Christian communities leverage platforms like Zoom for Bible studies on Genesis 12:36, with pastors citing Abraham's migration, Genesis 12:19, to address displacement and resilience, resonating with congregants facing economic or personal crises. Islam. Prophetic legacy. Ibrahim's trials, reflected in Genesis 12:36's covenant, Genesis 12:13, and Akedah, Genesis 22, inspire Muslim spirituality, with Eid al-Adha commemorating his sacrifice, Surah As-Safat 37:99-113. Hagar's resilience, Genesis 21:14-19, is central to Hajj Sa'i ritual, encouraging devotion amidst adversity. Sufi mysticism. Sufi communities draw on Yaqub's perseverance, Genesis 32:33, for mystical reflection, with Rumi's poetry citing Ibrahim's faith as a model for surrendering to Allah. Modern Sufi retreats use Genesis-inspired narratives to foster interfaith spirituality. Virtual communities. Online Islamic platforms, like Yaqeen Institute, explore Ibrahim's monotheism, Genesis 12:1, to address secular challenges, with webinars linking Genesis 12:36 to Quranic teachings, fostering global Muslim engagement. Contemporary context. The post-2020 rise in spiritual seeking, driven by pandemics and social unrest, amplifies the narrative's relevance, with their themes of faith and divine guidance offering solace. A 2023 Pew Research study noted increased religious exploration, with Genesis 12:36 cited in interfaith settings for its universal appeal. Digital platforms democratize access to the narratives, with apps like YouVersion and Alim integrating Genesis 12:36 into daily devotionals, reaching millions globally. Cultural significance. The narrative's spiritual applications foster resilience and community, with Jewish, Christian, and Muslim leaders using Abraham's chaste, Genesis 18:18, to promote virtual and in-person fellowship. They inspire interfaith spiritual initiatives, like the Abrahamic House of Prayer, which uses Genesis 12:36 to unite worshippers, addressing modern disconnection. 2 Ethical frameworks and leadership. The patriarchal narratives provide ethical frameworks that inform personal morality, leadership, and societal values, addressing contemporary issues like integrity, justice, and inclusivity. Personal ethics and teshuvah. Jacob's transformation from deceiver, Genesis 27, to Israel, Genesis 32:22-32, models teshuvah, inspiring Jewish Musar programs that teach ethical growth. Organizations like the Musar Institute use Genesis 12:36 to encourage self-reflection, addressing modern challenges like workplace ethics and family dynamics. Abraham's intercession for Sodom, Genesis 18:22-33, exemplifies justice and compassion, informing secular ethics courses at universities like Harvard, where Genesis 12:36 is studied for moral reasoning. The narrative's question, "Shall not the judge of all the earth do what is just?" Genesis 18:25, resonates in debates on fairness, leadership and diplomacy. Abraham's negotiations with Abimelech, Genesis 21:22-34, and Ephron, Genesis 23:320, model diplomatic leadership, cited in business schools, for example, Wharton, for conflict resolution. His hospitality, Genesis 18:18, inspires servant leadership, with faith-based organizations like the Center for Faith and Work applying Genesis 12:36 to corporate ethics. Rebekah's agency, Genesis 27:5-17, and Rachel's initiative, Genesis 31:34-35, highlight women's leadership, informing Jewish and Christian leadership programs, like the Wexner Foundation, which train women to draw on biblical models for community impact. Inclusivity and social ethics. Hagar's marginalization and divine rescue, Genesis 21:17-21, inspire inclusivity, with Jewish social justice groups like Bend the Ark citing Genesis 12:36 to advocate for immigrants and minorities. Christian liberation theology, as articulated by Gustavo Gutierrez, uses Hagar's story to address systemic oppression. The universal blessing, Genesis 12:3, informs ethical frameworks for global citizenship, with NGOs like Oxfam citing Abraham's legacy to promote equity, resonating with the UN's Sustainable Development Goals, 2015. Contemporary context. The rise of ethical consumerism and corporate social responsibility, post-2010, aligns with the narrative's emphasis on chaste and justice, with companies like Patagonia drawing on biblical ethics for sustainability. A 2024 Forbes report noted 60% of consumers prioritize ethical brands, reflecting Genesis-inspired values. Leadership challenges, from political polarization to workplace diversity, find guidance in the narrative's models of reconciliation, Genesis 33, and diplomacy, as seen in conflict mediation training by groups like Seeds of Peace. Cultural significance. The narrative's ethical frameworks shape faith-based and secular morality, with Abraham's compassion and Jacob's growth informing personal and societal values. They inspire leadership development, with interfaith programs like the Elijah Interfaith Institute using Genesis 12:36 to train global leaders in ethical decision-making. 3. Social movements and advocacy. The patriarchal narratives fuel social movements addressing migration, gender equity, environmental stewardship, and racial justice, offering moral and theological grounding for advocacy. Migration and refugee advocacy. The patriarch's sojourner status, Abraham in Egypt, Genesis 12:10-20, Isaac in Gerar, Genesis 26:1-6, Jacob in Haran, Genesis 28:10-29-1, resonates with modern migration crises. Jewish organizations like High cite Genesis 12:10 to support refugees, with programs aiding over 500,000 migrants annually, High's 2024 report. Christian groups, like Jesuit Refugee Service, draw on Abraham's hospitality, Genesis 18:18, to advocate for displaced populations, while Muslim charities, like Islamic Relief, use Hagar's wilderness journey, Genesis 21:14-19, to fund water projects in refugee camps. Secular policies, like the EU's Asylum Procedures Directive, echo the narrative's ethic of welcoming the stranger, with Genesis 12:36 cited in UN refugee forums for moral urgency. Gender equity and feminist theology. The agency of Sarah, Genesis 16:2, Rebecca, Genesis 27:5-17, and Rachel, Genesis 31:34-35, inspires feminist theology, with Jewish scholars like Rachel Adler reinterpreting Genesis 12:36 to highlight women's covenantal roles. Christian feminist theologians, like Elizabeth Scusola Fiorenza, use Hagar's story to advocate for marginalized women. Muslim women's movements, like Sisters in Islam, draw on Hagar's resilience, Genesis 21, to challenge patriarchal interpretations, promoting gender equity in Islamic law. The Hashmitu movement, while secular, resonates with the narrative's portrayal of women's agency, as seen in feminist readings of Genesis 34, Dinah. Interfaith initiatives, like Women of Faith for Peace, cite Genesis 12:36 to unite women across traditions, addressing issues like domestic violence and workplace equity. Environmental stewardship. The covenant's link to land, Genesis 12:7, informs Jewish environmental ethics, Baal Tashkit, with groups like Hazan using Abraham's stewardship to promote sustainable agriculture. The 2023 Jewish Climate Leadership Coalition cites Genesis 12:36 for climate action, linking land promises to ecological responsibility. Christian environmental movements, inspired by Pope Francis Laudato Si, 2015, draw on the universal blessing, Genesis 12:3, to advocate for creation care, with Genesis 12:36 framing humanity's role as stewards. Muslim eco-theology, as articulated by the Islamic Declaration on Climate Change, 2015, uses Ibrahim's legacy to promote environmental justice. Secular environmentalism, like the Green New Deal, echoes the narrative's vision of land as a divine gift, with activists citing Genesis 12:36 in interfaith climate rallies. Racial and social justice. Hagar's marginalization, Genesis 21, and Melchizedek's inclusion, Genesis 14:18-20, inspire racial justice, with Black Jewish communities, like Beth Shalom, using Genesis 12:36 to address systemic racism. Christian liberation theologians, like James Cone, cite Hagar to advocate for Black Lives Matter, linking her story to African American struggles. Interfaith coalitions, like the Poor People's Campaign, draw on Abraham's justice, Genesis 18:22-33, to fight poverty and inequality, with Genesis 12:36 informing marches and policy advocacy. Secular movements, like Amnesty International, resonate with the narrative's universal ethic, citing Genesis 12:3 to promote human rights, as seen in campaigns for indigenous land rights. Contemporary context. The global migration crisis, with 281 million international migrants in 2023, UN data, amplifies the narrative's sojourner theme, with faith-based and secular groups using Genesis 12:36 to advocate for humane policies. Gender and racial justice movements, post-2015, draw on the narrative's inclusivity, with Black Lives Matter and #MeToo citing biblical precedents for equity, as seen in interfaith vigils. Climate change, with 2024 as the hottest year on record, NOAA, underscores the narrative's environmental relevance, with Genesis 12:36 informing global summits like COP29. Cultural significance. The narrative's advocacy applications bridge religious and secular activism, with Abraham's chaste and Hagar's resilience shaping policies and protests. They inspire grassroots and global movements, from local refugee shelters to international climate accords, ensuring their ethical legacy endures. 4. Interfaith and intercultural dialogue. The patriarchal narratives foster interfaith and intercultural dialogue, leveraging their shared Abrahamic heritage to address religious tensions, cultural divides, and global cooperation. Interfaith dialogue. Abrahamic cooperation, the universal blessing, Genesis 12:3, inspires interfaith initiatives, with the Abrahamic Family House in Abu Dhabi, opened 2023, citing Genesis 12:36 to unite Jewish, Christian, and Muslim worshippers. The Abrahamic Business Circle promotes economic collaboration, drawing on Abraham's diplomacy, Genesis 21:22-34. Shared narratives. The Akedah, Genesis 22, interpreted as Isaac in Judaism and Christianity and Ismail in Islam, encourages respectful exchange, with forums like the Scriptural Reasoning Project using Genesis 12:36 to explore theological differences. Hagar's story, Genesis 21, bridges Jewish-Muslim dialogue, with conferences like the Wolf Institute highlighting her role in both traditions. Practical initiatives. Interfaith organizations like Religions for Peace cite Genesis 12:3 to address global issues, from poverty to conflict resolution. The 2024 Interfaith Harmony Week, endorsed by the UN, used Abraham's legacy to promote peace building, with Genesis 12:36 as a focal text. Intercultural dialogue. Cultural exchange. The Abraham Path Initiative, a cultural tourism project, retraces Abraham's migrations, Genesis 12:19, across the Middle East, fostering dialogue among diverse communities in Jordan, Palestine, and Israel. The project's 2024 expansion includes virtual tours, making Genesis 12:36 accessible globally. Multiculturalism. The narrative's inclusivity, Melchizedek, Genesis 14:18-20, Hagar, Genesis 21, supports multicultural policies, with cities like Toronto citing Genesis 12:36 in diversity campaigns. Educational programs, like USCO's Intercultural Dialogue Framework, use the narratives to teach coexistence. Conflict resolution, Jacob's reconciliation with Esau, Genesis 33, informs intercultural mediation, with groups like the Perez Center for Peace using Genesis 12:36 to bridge Israeli-Palestinian divides, emphasizing shared heritage. Contemporary context. Rising religious polarization, noted in a 2023 Gallup poll, underscores the need for interfaith dialogue, with Genesis 12:36's shared narratives countering extremism. The Abraham Accords, 2020, normalizing Israel-UAE relations, cited Abraham's legacy to promote cooperation. Globalization and migration increase intercultural interactions, with Genesis 12:36's sojourner theme informing policies like the EU's Integration Strategy, 2021, which emphasizes cultural inclusion. Digital platforms amplify dialogue, with interfaith podcasts like Abraham's Table and webinars on Genesis 12:36 reaching millions, fostering global understanding. Cultural significance. The narrative's dialogue applications bridge religious and cultural divides, with Abraham's universal vision shaping initiatives from local interfaith councils to global peace summits. They inspire educational and tourism projects, ensuring their heritage informs pluralistic societies, from Middle Eastern trails to Western classrooms. 5. Cultural innovation and digital engagement. The patriarchal narratives drive cultural innovation, influencing art, literature, media, and digital platforms, adapting their themes to contemporary creative and technological contexts. Art and visual culture. Contemporary artists reinterpret Genesis 12:36, with Israeli painter BBNA depicting Abraham's sacrifice, Genesis 22, in modern contexts, addressing conflict and identity. Interfaith installations, like the Abrahamic Art Project, 2024, use Jacob's Ladder, Genesis 28:10-22, to symbolize unity. Virtual reality exhibits, hosted by museums like the Israel Museum, recreate biblical sites like Hebron, Genesis 23, immersing audiences in the narrative settings. Augmented reality apps, like Bible VR, animate scenes from Genesis 12:36, engaging younger generations. Literature and storytelling. Modern literature reimagines the narratives, with novels like Maggie Anton's Rash's Daughters exploring Rebecca's agency, Genesis 27, and Colm Twain's The Testament of Mary reflecting on maternal perspectives. Graphic novels, like the comic Torah, depict Genesis 12:36 for educational outreach. Secular works, like Salman Rushdie's The Satanic Verses, engage Abrahamic themes, while children's books, like The Story of Abraham by P.J. Library, introduce Genesis 12:36 to young readers, fostering cultural literacy. Media and film. Films adapt the narratives, with animated features like Joseph, King of Dreams, 2000, drawing on Genesis 12:36's family dynamics, and documentaries like The Bible's Buried Secrets, PBS, 2018, exploring archaeological ties to Abraham's story. Streaming platforms, like Netflix, feature Genesis-inspired series, reaching global audiences. Social media campaigns, like #Abrahamic Stories on Instagram, share Genesis 12:36's themes, with influencers retelling Hagar's journey to address migration, amassing millions of views by 2024. Digital engagement. Online platforms preserve and innovate the narrative's legacy, with Spheria's digital Torah offering midrashic commentaries on Genesis 12:36, accessed by over 1 million users monthly, 2024 data. Christian apps like YouVersion include Genesis 12:36 in devotionals, with 500 million downloads by 2025. Islamic platforms, like Alim, integrate Genesis-inspired Quranic narratives, while interfaith apps, like Peace Hub, use Genesis 12:3 to foster dialogue, connecting 100,000 users globally. AI-driven tools, like virtual Torah study bots, analyze Genesis 12:36 for personalized insights, with platforms like MyJewish Learning piloting such technology in 2024, enhancing accessibility. Contemporary context. The digital revolution, with 5.3 billion Internet users in 2024, ITU data, amplifies the narrative's reach, with Genesis 12:36's universal themes resonating in virtual communities. Social media's influence, noted in a 2023 Pew study, makes the narratives a tool for cultural engagement. The post-COVID shift to digital spirituality, with 40% of religious services online, 2024 Barna report, underscores the narrative's adaptability, with Abraham's faith inspiring virtual worship. Cultural significance. The narrative's cultural innovations ensure their relevance, with art, literature, and media adapting their themes for diverse audiences, from religious to secular. Digital engagement preserves their legacy, with AI and virtual platforms making Genesis 12:36 accessible, fostering global cultural dialogue and education. 6. Synthesis, a timeless guide for modern challenges. The contemporary relevance and applications of Genesis 12:36 demonstrate their enduring power to address modern challenges with theological depth and ethical wisdom. In religious renewal, the narratives inspire Jewish, Christian, and Muslim spirituality, with Abraham's faith, the Akedah, and Hagar's resilience fostering resilience and community in a digital age. Ethical frameworks draw on Jacob's teshuvah and Abraham's justice to guide personal morality, leadership, and inclusivity, addressing workplace ethics and global citizenship. Social movements leverage the patriarch's sojourner status and Hagar's story to advocate for migration, gender equity, environmental stewardship, and racial justice, aligning with global priorities like the UN's Sustainable Development Goals. Interfaith and intercultural dialogue, rooted in the universal blessing, Genesis 12:3, bridge religious and cultural divides, promoting peace and cooperation through shared Abrahamic heritage. Cultural innovation adapts the narratives to art, literature, media, and digital platforms, ensuring their accessibility and vitality. Rooted in ancient contexts yet adaptable to modern needs, Genesis 12:36 offers a moral and spiritual compass for navigating pluralism, polarization, and global crises, preparing for the Torah's redemptive arc and inviting all to engage its vision of faith, justice, and universal hope. Impact on modern issues. The narratives address migration, 281 million migrants, 2023, climate change, 2024's record heat, and social inequities, with their ethics informing policies and activism. Their interfaith applications counter polarization, with Genesis 12:36 cited in global peace initiatives, from the Abraham Accords to UN forums. Cultural and religious significance. The narratives unify religious communities, shape ethical discourse, and inspire cultural creativity, ensuring their relevance across traditions and secular contexts. Their digital presence democratizes access, with Genesis 12:36 fostering global dialogue and education, from virtual Torah study to interfaith apps. Future potential. Emerging technologies, like AI-driven exegesis and virtual reality tours, will expand the narrative's reach, with Genesis 12:36 informing future ethical and cultural frameworks. Their universal themes will continue to address evolving challenges, from AI ethics to space exploration, offering timeless wisdom for humanity's future. 7. Conclusion: a living legacy for the 21st century. The patriarchal narrative's contemporary relevance and applications underscore their role as a living legacy, offering profound insights for a complex, interconnected world. Their spiritual applications renew faith across Jewish, Christian, and Muslim traditions, addressing disconnection with covenantal hope. Ethical frameworks guide personal and societal morality, fostering leadership and inclusivity amidst polarization. Social movements draw on their themes to advocate for justice, equity, and sustainability, responding to global crises. Interfaith and intercultural dialogue leverage their shared heritage to bridge divides, promoting peace and understanding. Cultural innovations ensure their vitality, with art, literature, and digital platforms adapting their stories for new generations. From ancient promises to modern challenges, Genesis 12:36 provides a vision of divine-human partnership, ethical responsibility, and universal blessing, resonating in religious sanctuaries, policy forums, and cultural spaces. As a foundation for the Torah's narrative, they invite all to engage their transformative wisdom, shaping a future of faith, justice, and global solidarity. Thank you for watching Big Breaking News of America. Make sure to subscribe and turn on the bell icon for more news updates. Share our channel with your friends and family members, leave a like for more videos and express your thoughts under comment section.